While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust, and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Franke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. We talk about the threat landscape for the industrial sector. The eye-catching, headline-grabbing hacking groups with nefarious names typically lead the list of concerns. And while understanding their well-publicized exploits are important, what's often overlooked are all the little things these groups were able to do before dropping malware, shutting down networks, extorting ransoms, and stealing data. This is where taking the time to address those insecure connection points, update login credentials, or patch 0 and 1-day vulnerabilities continue to be essential in the fight to safeguard operational technology and the industrial control system. But the reasons these problems remain is that the solution is never as simple as it sounds, so hopefully our collection of experts for this episode can help show you the way. Let's start with Rob Larson as he discusses the significance of identity protection and expanding industrial security capabilities. I want to talk a little bit more about the identity protection element because I think with manufacturing, you're focused on IP, you're focused on financials, and some of the identity elements sort of get lost in the shuffle a little bit. Maybe you can bring us back a little and talk about why there needs to be a greater focus on identity and on some of that personal information that is also extremely valuable. Just ask the folks at Colonial Pipeline.
I think I'll take us back to that question, Jeff, because it's a really cool question. But I didn't start my career out doing identity. In fact, I didn't do a lot of identity toward the end of my my stay with General Motors, and I did not realize how important identity was to zero trust until I had both the identity strategy and zero trust together, and I took a step back. I'm like, holy smokes, you can't do zero trust in any of its forms, as I mentioned earlier. In tailored to fit manufacturing, tailored to fit labs, in the enterprise. If you don't do identity properly, right, correctly, and that is really total visibility, right? Every account is understood, and every account has a security plan. And so you begin to bundle up these accounts and start kind of crafting security policy to protect them. Whether it's ring fencing or you do, you every time that account is used, you do a challenge against the individual who is attempting to use that account. You start crafting out all these ideas based upon what the identity, the purpose of the identity. And I'll tell you, what I realized was you really needed to figure out within the manufacturing space, as I mentioned earlier, which identities can be moved into a directory. To the extent that you can bring them into a directory, I would argue you're better off, because then I can have total visibility. I can begin to apply different policies to different accounts for different reasons, and the individuals that are using those accounts know what they're for, and they exist for a reason. And then for local accounts, right, those are always interesting and challenging. You begin to figure out what to do to protect those local accounts that are not that you can't port to the domain. And I think that in its essence, that is identity protection. We just use Silverfort to do a lot of that capability because it made best sense. And local accounts are always challenging, so you have to tackle them because you don't really know what you have to go look at that machine. Like, what is that machine doing with that local account? Is it the same local account across all your manufacturing facilities? or is there one of them that exists in the world and you've got it in your building? And you have to kind of begin to craft kind of that security strategy so that every account has a security strategy within that manufacturing space. If you leave, as one of my senior architects taught me, every account matters, right? And so you got to have a plan for every account. And when you move them into the directory, you can kind of build kind of plans around bundles of accounts that might be doing some of the same things, and then separate accounts out because they aren't doing the same thing. They don't talk to the same machines. They aren't used by the same people in the same locations. You can go, these manufacturing facilities need separate accounts. I don't want to see the same account across 5 or 6 manufacturing facilities that are maybe spread around the world. Once you bring them into the directory, you can begin to look at what people are doing with these accounts. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And then you can consolidate your security, incident response, and SOC work around that consolidation.
Well, and I would think it would really strengthen and simplify a lot of segmentation strategies as well.
It would, right? And then as you go down inside, the industrial network where you're really close to the manufacturing process itself, you can begin to go again with kind of your vendor help and your networking team. How can I create sort of pods of work that need to talk only to other pods of work and not to everybody, right? And so now you're really beginning to bring that zero trust model, to fruition in terms of I'm only going to let people talk to the people that they need to. And but inside that pod there may be 50 machines working as a unit, but they don't get to talk to anybody in the world. They only need to talk to that other pods that are part of that work effort.
Well, and the thing that I think is misunderstood there sometimes is they can. It's just not that doorway isn't automatically open. We can open that door when we want to. Let's just not set it up so it's swinging both ways right from the start.
Right. To me, that's a manufacturing style zero trust, meaning, hey, you're bundling up all those units of work together. They've got a shared common goal. We kind of ring fence them along the way, whether it's both identity or networking, and then we figure out who gets to use that account and why. And then everybody else doesn't. You just can't use the account. It's not part of your pot of work. And then, that's just not ease of use. That stops lateral movement. If you can't go anywhere, if something has happened, and that account is used for malicious purposes, it's stuck in its own little pod. It can't be used in any other place. And then you can isolate it, and then you can go address the issue, and then you can figure out what control had a problem. And there's always that evolution of control deployment and tailoring and fitting policies to the business use, and that's just part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been talking about a lot of these strategies that have continued to evolve. The reason that they've had to evolve is because the bad guys are doing the same thing. They're getting a lot better. You've mentioned ransomware. We know about stuff that the supply chains are becoming more and more vulnerable. We've got AI-generated phishing attacks. We've got ICS now, specific malware that folks are coming out with from a lot of state-sponsored hackers. When you look at this whole threat landscape, what sort of gets your attention the most? Where do you think the biggest threat is right now, and where are you focused, I guess?
I from a manufacturing perspective, I'll tell you what, it's both really exciting and super scary at the same time, because, manufacturing, I would argue, is a really cool place to work. And you see all these machines and the product is working, and watching a car get, produced is really an amazing thing. I would say that this will be the most challenging space for the next 5 to 8 years, because we have we from the cybersecurity community have lagged significantly behind kind of that manufacturing risk space. Like, we just haven't been talking about it, and I think there's going to have to be some acceleration in that space if we want to catch up. Look, it took us 30-ish years on the enterprise side just to get right here. And I'm talking about my years, right? There could be a few more years before that, but the reality is 30 years to get right about here. And I'd say that in the manufacturing space, you got about 6 or 8.
Well, and what's
Right?
interesting is
You know,
you'd say it took 30 years to get here. How much of that do you think the growth from as a percentage has really happened in the last 4? I mean, what's happened, the first 26 versus the last 4 is really incredible, but also puts into perspective how far we had to come to get where we are. And there's still a lot left to do.
True. I think the capabilities 30 years ago were pretty rudimentary. I think now we've got amazing security capabilities across dozens and dozens and dozens of vendors. This is gonna sound silly, but I think that's also a problem. I think we have too many security controls, right? I think if you talk to a lot of experts and practitioners, I think they're going, look, I got like 85 security controls. I can't orchestrate that. Like, I don't even know where some of them are deployed. So I think there's a dilemma in that there's so many security controls, they're hard to operate as well, and that's actually to the benefit of the attackers as well.
Yeah.
You might have the right security controls, you haven't either even tuned them right, or you haven't deployed them properly. That your scope is wrong, or you've configured it wrong. So I think there's going to have to be some rationalization, Jeff, over time of how many security controls do you really need? Where is that risk, right? Talk about risk as opposed to I need another tool, which is normally a security practitioner's game is I need more security controls. And maybe you should just use the security controls you got more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. You're creating new vulnerabilities essentially because you think there's redundancy or overlap, but because there's so much to manage, there's gaps. You're creating gaps with all the tools because there's just too much.
Yeah, and maybe you should pivot back to the vendors that you care about, your trusted advisor vendors, and go, I need to take out like 20% of the security controls I've got. So you guys need to step up and help me, address these gaps because it's unaffordable, and we're doing a poor job of managing the controls. So I'm not going to get any more headcount. I think the way I'm going to have to do this is take out controls that just aren't working well in my environment and go work with the vendors that I've got that I trust to get them to help me, deploy and manage their controls more effectively.
Well, I think this bleeds in, and this is kind of a loaded question. I think I know how you're going to respond to it, but one of the scariest threats that I've seen out there is this Cyber Avengers group. They're the ones that were responsible for that Unitronics PLC hack. They recently developed a brand of malware that was just focused on the ICS, and it was going after stuff in Israel because that's their main target, but sort of on the periphery target, it was stuff here in the U.S. and really around the world. When I think about the ICS and how vulnerable it can be, a lot of those came from the fact that stuff was connected to the internet.
Yes.
In general, and I think I know where you're going with this, but are we just over-connected right now? Do we need to pull more plugs?
I think a lot of it was deployed with a kind of a open connectivity model.
Yeah.
And again, the cyber team was not focused on manufacturing and whatever lines were coming in and being refreshed. And, we had no sort of semblance of understanding why why would the manufacturing ICS vendors want to dial into the factory? Well, they do. They want to call into the factory. They want to see how their product is performing. And by the way, we may have had a contract with them that says you have to. And so I think connectivity is a great thing. It probably accelerates business and makes these lines work more effectively together. I think that like I talked about, I think that zero trust model that's tailored for manufacturing really gives everybody a great opportunity to really understand, what connectivity do you want in and how do you want to enable it, and stop, crazy connectivity outbound because it's not part of the business game plan. And those are really kind of, I would say, I'm not going to say they're easy, but they're well understood. Like, hey, let's go take away all that stuff that nobody's using anyway. They shouldn't be. And let's shrink that attack surface down to, okay, we're going to go to battle with these 5 or 10 protocols, and we're going to figure out how to do outbound security management and inbound security management for both humans and devices. And I think that will work. But that's a philosophy adoption that I tie back to the North Star, where we talk about simple language, like what are the principles of a manufacturing cybersecurity strategy in normal language? No jargon, no abbreviations, no acronyms. What is it that we want in normal terms?
Yeah, and some of this really represents a paradigm shift for a lot of companies because with all the remote monitoring that they want in place, depending on your facility, what you're producing, that can be a very challenging dynamic to switch because you want everybody to have eyes on everything. Yeah.
Which I would argue is one of the principles that, like, hey, as part of our cybersecurity strategy or our North Star, this is one of the things that's if you leave it out, it's a non-starter. Like we have to have remote connectivity, both inbound and outbound, and we have to be able to deliver, data to our vendors, and our vendors want to come in and take a look at how their products are performing, and we want that, and it has to be it has to be considered as part of the North Star cybersecurity strategy, and you write it down, it becomes real. That committee, the executive committee agrees, and it's a cross-functional group. And now it's not a matter of, well, do we want to? It's a matter of how, and it's a matter of priority. And then you go, well, how does the enterprise do it? Well, we don't have that answer either. But maybe now you've got a coalition of the willing to go figure out that it doesn't matter whether it's on the lab, manufacturing, or the enterprise. That problem exists. So let's go solve it.
Thanks, Rob. Now let's hear from Mandiant's Paul Shaver to get his take on some prominent ICS vulnerabilities and patching challenges. But you do have some experience working in the energy sector within critical infrastructure. And I just kind of want to throw this out to you as we're talking about industrial control systems. We see this trend right now where the hackers are really going after utilities. They're going after critical infrastructure, and the ICS is being used within those enterprises. This is really scary to me because it feels like it establishes a blueprint for then going after true industrial control systems and getting in manufacturers, slowing down or shutting down production, and so on. What are some of the tactics you're seeing here? What has been the evolution that may be taking place that we need to be aware of in terms of these types of attacks and how to better defend the ICS?
We'll be back after a quick break.
AI is changing the game of business. Will you be on the winning team? I'm Jordan Wilson, the host of the Everyday AI podcast and your coach to help you learn the X's and O's of AI. Artificial intelligence isn't just a new player in the game, it's a new sport altogether. So if you don't quickly put AI into play, your competitors will run up the score. I've spent my whole life building winning teams, from coaching basketball to working with big players like Nike and Jordan Brand. My next move? Helping you win with Everyday AI. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or on everydayaipodcast.com. Let's tap into AI together and put points on the board.
So the vast majority of stuff that we see where ICS is a primary target, these are being accessed through internet-facing devices, right? So to your point, right? Some of these energy sector, and I think there's probably some water and wastewater attacks in there that have kind of been in the news where an attacker has gained access to something, they've manipulated something, or they've posted a video on YouTube, and those attacks where they're directly targeting those systems are coming through those edge devices, and so this is there's a number of those types of systems that get used in these environments, right? We've got remote facilities that have LTE modems, or they've got some kind of public backhaul infrastructure that's supporting it. And so that firewall or that router is, hanging off the internet, or sometimes even, the device itself, the HMI or a VFD controller is hanging directly off the internet, and it's being accessed by an operator somewhere. And so really back to asset inventory, understanding what you have, how it's connected, how you're getting that data back, how you're getting access to those devices, because edge devices are a huge target. And then obviously we've seen a huge influx in 0 days in the last 18 months. So those 0 days are playing a pretty big role in compromising vulnerabilities in these edge devices, which then gains access directly into these ICS environments. The vast majority of the time where we respond to incidents and OT is kind of a secondary impact, that's all coming through IT networks. Still, the edge devices are still a big problem there, right? That's how the access is getting in. But the attackers are getting in. But the that's a kind of a second. OT is usually a secondary effect there, right? Because we're getting a ransomware impact on your IT servers that support OT in some way, and you got to shut something down. So, when we see ICS systems targeted to, the point you're making with this question, that's usually through those edge devices, and getting an idea of how those systems are connected and mitigating those security risks is the first place to start looking.
Some other things that are going on, I'd like to get your take on, Paul, here as it relates to the ICS that are big issues for manufacturers particularly. One of them is patching. You talked about the number of 0 days that are coming out here, and there are a lot of solutions for some of those 0 days with the ICS providers. They're getting better at communicating them through CISA and other avenues, but taking the time to implement those patches, again, can be super daunting. So what advice could you give maybe in best practices in terms of prioritizing, trying to avoid downtime? That's a big objection point. We get to some of those patches, and just putting them in place to reduce some of those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, my answer here sometimes scares people a little bit. If you don't have to patch, don't patch. So that's a crazy statement, right? But it comes back to your security hygiene and looking at that vulnerability and looking at the other mitigating factors that are outside of the patch. If you can't mitigate it with segmentations or access controls or something else, then absolutely you're going to have to patch. But it becomes a triage process of looking at that vulnerability, identifying, how accessible or exploitable that vulnerability is in your particular environment, what the impact of that vulnerability being exploited in your environment is, and how can we mitigate it? Are there other ways to mitigate that don't require a patch? Patch, in a lot of cases, for a live production environment, a patch should be the last thing that you consider. Because if you've got good security hygiene in place and you've got good mitigating controls, or you can implement mitigating controls for this, you may not have to patch. So, we've walked into plenty of environments that are, 14, 15 plus years old, and they're still running firmware revisions from 9 or 10 years ago, and they're doing it securely and safely because they've got other mitigating controls in place, and they can continue to operate in a way that is still safe and secure for their environment, because they've got other controls. So patching in some of these environments, patching could very well be your last option. If you don't need to, why bring a production environment down if it's not necessary? So that's probably a pretty blunt answer that you might not get from everybody. But having been an asset owner, having built these systems from the ground up, I understand the realities that sometimes it's just not possible, and so you got to mitigate that some other way.
Well, it's interesting though, because the thing you kept, stating there is other mitigation strategies in place and understanding what those are. I think that goes back to, again, knowing your asset inventory, knowing what you've got, and having a good understanding of all those things so that you can put a different approach as opposed to just the patch. But again, know what those mitigating elements are so you can properly implement them. That's a big part of that process too. Just don't want folks hearing this and be going, done. Don't need to worry about that now.
No, absolutely not. You need to worry about it. It needs to be a concern, but again, segmentation and access controls, how could that thing be exploited? If it is exploited, what's the impact? Knowing what your asset inventory is, so you know what devices are vulnerable, because I've been in plenty of facilities where you have, maybe 3 different generations of PLCs from a hardware perspective, but 7 different generations of firmware. So, having an understanding of what you have, even from facility to facility, in the same organization, is really important, because otherwise, how do you know what to patch, right? So all of that is important. But if you don't understand what you got, you can't patch it. And if you do understand what you got and what your capabilities are to mitigate, you can make an educated decision there. And like I said, not bring a production environment down unless you absolutely necessary.
HackerOne's Will Capaccio weighs in next to discuss some major soft spots and the way his company has used a bug bounty to help uncover and better defend against emerging threats. I guess I know you work with a lot of different companies. Our audience is in the industrial sector, so a lot of manufacturing, a lot of infrastructure. Are there certain vulnerabilities that you tend to uncover more frequently, whether it's, again, looking across the board or maybe specifically within the industrial side of things?
Yeah, across the board, right? We publish an annual HackerOne Top 10. And this is what I was actually referring to earlier.
Oh,
We've
okay.
done a lot of interesting comparisons with the OWASP Top 10, with top 10s that are commonly found in our pen tests, right, versus our bug bounty and so forth. So we certainly break that down by industry. I think industrial manufacturing is certainly one of the more rare types of industries on the HackerOne platform. So we don't necessarily have a statistically significant look at the HackerOne top 10 for them, but most of our industries, right, have some form of alignment with the platform top 10. And there we see a lot of repeat offenders, if you will, right, year over year. But the most common one is going to be business logic. It's there every year. It's maybe not in the top 5 or top 3, but it is always there. And it is a very unique value prop against pen testing or scanners that HackerOne consistently is able to deliver through bug bounty and disclosure. It's that human manual approach to testing and that style of testing that differs from everything else that might be sitting in a security stack that we're able to deliver on, and the data certainly bears that out year over year.
Okay. Yeah, definitely encourage folks to check that out on the HackerOne website. A lot of good information there. Another big part of HackerOne is the bug bounty program that you've mentioned a couple of different times. I think I saw something on the website. You've handed out over $150 million in bounties to ethical hackers and in trying to finding a lot of these soft spots. Talk to us a little bit about this program, how you initiate it, because I know a lot of folks have sort of shied away from it or gone away from these types of programs for a multitude of reasons. But let's talk about why you guys continue to do it and maybe a little bit of the structure of it.
Yeah. Why we continue to do it is we consistently get wow bugs for customers, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it happens all the time, and certainly some programs that are doing the right things, right, are going to find them more frequently than others. There's a ton of variables that go into that, but ultimately there's tremendous potential to uncover huge risks in your attack surface because it is such a different style of testing from your other tools. So I will say, like, why do we keep running these, or maybe rather, why do people shy away from them, I should say. I think it is largely, maybe we're victims of our own marketing in some ways, because people see the big names like AWS, right, is a big HackerOne customer that spends a lot of money with us and pays hackers quite a bit, as you mentioned. So they see that and they think it has to be public. It has to be big dollar values. And that's not true. We have over 80% of our customer base is private. They're going to stay private. They're not going to have these big public programs, and they have limited budgets, right? But we are able to pair them with a few hackers, as many as might be appropriate, and help them uncover bugs and risk that they can't with their current team, whether that's because they're underskilled or understaffed, excuse me, right? There's a ton of reasons why you just can't hire all the security talent out there. So that's where we come in.
Interesting. Have there been, I know you can't probably talk about specific companies or anything like that, but has there been anything that really sticks out with some of the bugs that folks have found, things that you never would have thought would come to light in this type of format?
Yeah, we actually have a hacktivity feed that I want to mention first, right? So hackerone.com/hacktivity. It's a feed of disclosed vulnerabilities that those public customers have mutually agreed to disclose along with the hacker that reported it. Right, so you can go check these out for yourself in real time. There's thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities up there. We've had some of our hackers even learn how to hack just by going in and reading report after report.
Sure.
So they're tremendously interesting. I'll share one that is particularly close to me. One of the peers on my team shared an Excel sheet that connected to Salesforce. And essentially, there was a marketing form on our website that fed into the sheet, and it did some things in Salesforce. And so at HackerOne, we actually received a bug through our own bug bounty program, of course, where a hacker was able to use the marketing form to extract information from our Salesforce instance, right? And so that's just one example of a vulnerability that's maybe kind of crazy in how it was implemented. I don't know if that one in particular is disclosed. I don't want to talk too much about other customers' bugs, but that was certainly one of the crazier ones that I've been. That one I was a kind of a part of as well. So that there's all kinds of implications for even just spinning up a Google sheet, right? That you may not think of, that hackers are able to find that one crack in and bust it wide open.
Now let's wrap things up with Jesse Varsalone, co-author of The Hack is Back, as he discusses some basic and legacy vulnerabilities. With all of your experience, looking back at the time at the DoD, your exposure to things right now, and looking at the book as well as talking about the hackers, are you seeing anything right now in terms of different techniques or hacking groups that are sort of getting your attention or lighting up your radar in terms of things that are new or different or more alarming?
So most of the focus seems to right now be on what you were referring to earlier is not just normal Windows and Linux and normal cybersecurity, but ICS devices, IoT devices, SCADA devices. So in recent years, my competition team has competed in Hack the Port. They did get third place in that. That was in Fort Lauderdale. Hack the Hospital. We've done Hack the Railroad, and last week we did Hack the Airport. So all these, and this kind of seems relevant to your listeners as well, all these different devices in the world that are connected to, and the different consequences. So in my book, I talk about the consequences, like, for example, if something like blueprints or intellectual property are stolen, but the consequences of that type of cyber warfare could be more immediate if you're messing with nuclear reactors, or you're changing solar panel directions, or a number of things, the water supply. So I think that really seems to be, as I do lots of competitions and go over and do conferences, that really seems to be a big item that is really on the forefront of everyone's mind, is all these different devices that are connected that may not have necessarily been connected to the internet in the past. Like you said, maybe they were air gapped, but now there's a cloud provider that watches them, or there's examples of your energy is managed by a company in a different state, and there's all these different things that are connected that make us vulnerable, that we weren't vulnerable maybe 10 years ago because it wasn't as widely cloud-based, etc.
Absolutely. We've seen a huge uptick in attacks on the industrial sector, and that comes from a lot of different variables here. We talk about this a lot on the show. There's more technology, there's more connection points, there's more legacy technology connecting with new stuff. But what it's really created is just this influx of attacks on manufacturing. It's the most hacked industry right now, industry sector above even healthcare and banking. When you look at it from a little bit from the outside, is there some advice that you could maybe offer the industrial sector in terms of here's where you start? Because looking at it from an ethical hacking perspective, this is where I would start first, or this is why it's very attractive to me to go after your enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, what we find typically is a lot of out-of-date software, out-of-date operating systems that host. That's not always an easily solvable problem, because sometimes, for example, the software won't run on newer versions of Windows, etc. Or you can't upgrade the computer equipment; it's too old. So a lot of the legacy programs need to be updated. What you could do, and I know some companies are looking at that, and I've done this before for a company, is you can virtualize the system that's connected to them, and then try to harden your virtual infrastructure. So having older operating systems like XP or Windows 7, things of that nature, older versions of server, older versions of Linux, Those always make the. And then I've seen things where, you know, I've done some consulting in the past where some of those devices didn't support high enough security or secure enough passwords or all those things. So looking at the actual programming of the device, but you also have to say, you know, is it going to cost you know, $5 million to write new code that will be updated, that will work? You have to look at that, the risks associated. Maybe AI can be something that can assist companies of updating software, you know, in the future. So it's able to run, and it can be drivers. It can be, you know, I've seen someone that had a printer that was, you know, half the size of a room, and there was just never really a driver written for it past Windows XP, and the printer was, you know, like $1 million. So what are you going to do in that scenario? You just have to be aware. You do have to be aware of the risks, and then you have to decide: are we going to accept the risk? Because what the attackers will do is, and I've done that, and I've been on the response side and the attack side. Of course, this was all things I was, you know, contracted to do. But you're going to look for those low-hanging fruits, the systems on the network, and those are often connected to some of these devices that you're referring to, and that can be a field day for attackers. So, you know, looking at the security of them, hardening the best you can, trying to get an updated version if there is one, trying to virtualize the infrastructure, and figuring out a way to secure it. Like you said, not having it connected to the internet or having it air gapped or something, unless it absolutely needs to be connected.
Thanks for joining us today. And to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. Thanks for your time. I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.